Thank you, Ambassador Pickering, for that kind introduction, and it's great to be here today. I just wanted to thank, on behalf of Sean and myself, really the support we received to do this project from the Academy, from Carolyn Cox Foundation and Lino, and John from the Chamber, and I know there are other members of our advisory committee, which is listed in the report, but I wanted to really thank the advisory committee we had that spent considerable time with us going over the original drafts, working on them, improving them. So this, I think, today is a very special moment for Sean and I, who spent over a year really doing a process that was kind of a joy for us, given our prior lives, to listen to the business community and government and try to put together a report that had some meaning going forward. So thank you for all of that. I'll try to be brief so that you can really have the advantage, I think, of the panel discussion and the questions to probe where you want to. But I did want to spend a few minutes laying out what I think are the key findings and methodologies in the report. You've got, I think, that available to you when you came in today. But the challenge that we took on, Sean and I, was to looking at this, I think, very special moment in time in the global economy, to make an assessment of how the overseas platforms in our embassies were able to provide the right services and support for the American business community as it looked to develop new markets and to maintain its position in existing markets. There was a sense, and I think that was when Carolyn brought the project to the Academy and to us, that we had gone through some fundamental changes in the last decade that we needed to understand better in a variety of ways, but particularly, I know in the State Department and Commerce Department and other foreign affairs agencies, how was this change really affecting us, and did we have the capacities anymore that we needed to be responsive and appropriately supportive of companies going overseas? So that was one point. I wanted to kind of define the actual job. The methodology was no large survey and the like, but we did have very much a belief that this could have important implications if we did a collaborative approach. So we tested out the premise and the assignment at the senior levels of the State and Commerce Department. Undersecretary Kathy Novelli, Assistant Secretary Rifkin, Ambassador Thorne were all involved in telling us this was something that they were interested in at the time. And the same in Commerce with Undersecretary Selig, Deputy Undersecretary Hyatt, Judy's here, Arun Kumar. The senior leadership from the Commerce Department welcomed the initiative to kind of take a look at this. And so that began to shape it. The methodology, though, wasn't to have a government-to-government kind of helping the government talk to each other, but it was really going out, and we surveyed over 50 executives that were involved in international business, affiliated with many corporations. The names are listed. Some of them partially are listed in the report, to give a sense of what were we hearing back from them as to what they were finding as challenges and how to go forward. So I wanted to also say exactly what sustains the report in its findings and recommendations, and how we built this, first collaborating with our government colleagues and friends, and then listening to the business community and bringing that discussion back and forth. And we've spent some considerable time in the last 2 months vetting those conclusions with all of the partners here, and look forward to deciding it with you today. Commercial diplomacy, I'll be very brief on the term. It was interesting to decide how do we describe this program of commercial diplomacy. I won't go into all that decision making, but what do we mean when we talk about this platform? It's really how do business and government collaborate overseas in the marketplace to achieve a national interest objective. And the report has more detail in the history of commercial diplomacy, the fact that I would argue it's a core part of our American diplomacy throughout our history, is doing commercial diplomacy, and that's the terminology in the platform. The top line takeaway, I think if you had to have one, would be that, and this isn't because there's a problem so much, it's because everybody recognizes that given the challenges in today's global marketplace, our commercial diplomacy programs need to adapt relatively quickly to meet these new challenges and to go forward. It was very interesting to listen to the experiences we gathered in the interviews about the excellent examples that came up across the board in different parts of the world, and the interest in how those best practices and how those successes, and I think we might hear about some of those today in the panel, how that could become something more systematically delivered and more expected across all of the markets that were important to us in today's economy. Findings, again, this may or may not be surprising, but it was very interesting to catch a sense from a cross-section of companies in traditional manufacturing industries to technology, to services, that in the last 10 years, the global marketplace had fundamentally changed. It's changed in terms of the speed. Frankly, post whatever we're calling it, the Great Recession, the financial crisis, the slow growth that's happening has actually intensified the nature of the change and how people are looking for ever more efficiencies to make their results known. And the global value chains and integrated systems are becoming more and more important to the companies. That plus speed was something that came across whatever industry sector you're in that struck us as very important as a finding, combined with a sense that we're at a moment in the global system where there is a kind of breakdown of the old rules and order. And by that I mean it would be very interesting to hear pockets of experience where procurement is going on in a certain way that doesn't really have anything to do with the government procurement code or other things in a certain rules-based system, and there's a whole other way of operating and a whole set of challenges coming to us. And we needed to kind of understand how to both play in that world and perhaps assist in the creation of what is emerging as a new system of rules to govern the world trading area. Ambassador Pickering mentioned an issue we grappled with in the report. This is a report about commercial diplomacy programs and how the Foreign Service, how particularly State and Commerce as the key deliverers of those services with the Agriculture Department, and there's a range of agencies obviously involved in this. But we heard consistently about the policy issues, that were confronting companies in overseas marketplaces, that dealt with the challenges of actually running a global value chain when you had all sorts of different barriers, all sorts of other approaches. And so we've pasted an annex in the report, I think a succinct but useful discussion of the policy challenges, because this was not going to be a report, which might have had a larger audience discussing it today, about how to resolve the policy approaches on trade or how to resolve the policy here. These are important informative factors that inform how we would recommend the changes that are coming to the actual commercial diplomacy program. But I wanted to mention that to you as you look at the executive summary and hopefully go beyond that. It's a short report, but there is an important, I think, 4 or 5 page annex that talks about investment, that talks about trade, and gathers the thoughts, not that Sean and I have, but gathers the thoughts we heard from the business community about what they saw happening in that environment in a daily basis and how they would urge us to adapt programs to accommodate to that environment. Concluding this brief presentation, I think if there was one conclusion, it was that, and again, I think this happens in the best practice cases. We heard excellent stories of embassies, and ambassadorial leadership kind of determined a lot of how I think we were performing in different markets, because there was that higher level vision that could make sure whatever resources the embassy community had were organized in a collaborative team way, could deliver their agency's products, but could see more clearly maybe a national interest program and how to do that. But clearly, in today's world, commercial diplomacy isn't an add-on program. It isn't something that is a luxury. But and Secretary Kerry has said this. I know I've read recently Secretary Pritzker's speeches at National Press Club and the like, that it is part of our foreign policy. It's a core element of what we do. And again, the report, very briefly, less than a page, kind of walks you through the history of our diplomacy and how much commercial diplomacy has played in what we do overseas on behalf of the U.S. national interest. Finally, the report documents 4 requirements in terms of its challenge and 6 recommendations. The requirements, and I'll briefly just enumerate them, is, again, answering the question, what did we hear from the business community about new requirements for new generation programs, is a sense that we needed, I wouldn't say a new, because I'm not sure we actually have one right now, but a new framework to look at these programs. Again, I'm distinguishing the programs from the policy. The two obviously will relate to each other, but whatever the policy we have, we're going to be doing commercial diplomacy. And in that context, the idea was the framework would be very useful to break out of what, again, came through in the findings, that catching up to the speed and the global value chain is a somewhat outdated mentality of mercantilist work, where we're focusing on exporting a physical product. Now, I know we're all grappling with how to expand that, but that was a sense of a lot of what was driving the program was still that very important. I don't want to diminish the importance of manufacturing exports, but how they happen and where they happen, and that change has gone on. And it really said that if, again, I think under Commerce and state leadership, a group of in the government could come together and look at a framework that would acknowledge that not only inward investment, where Select USA at the Commerce Department, an interagency mechanism, is working on inward investment, but how do you actually grapple more positively with the outward investment question and determine when that is in a national interest and how do you support investment? And the whole trade conundrum of strategic imports, perhaps because exports will happen if you have the right import components coming in. Anyway, the whole way of putting the value chain in play probably required a new framework where Commerce, I know, is working. Everyone is working on that in the agencies, but it was an important point to make about thinking anew about the environment for these programs. Second, the programs themselves. Not surprisingly, but I think it was important to hear this across the spectrum, that with the internet, with all the smart apps on the phones and the like, a lot of the information that our programs used to provide isn't necessarily to be provided by the embassies. They're there. Information, contacts, a lot of those core services. The question then becomes, how do you move up the value chain and really offer strategic advice and counseling to companies, following sectors? How do you actually do policy advocacy, not just procurement advocacy, but how do companies get access to regulatory and standards areas? And so, again, I'll stop on that, but it was a whole idea that the value added was going to be increasingly in this strategic advice, policy advocacy, in the advocacy area, frankly, where ambassadors and DCMs and their senior people would almost on a daily basis be looking at the enabling environment for the business community in the market they're located in. And finally, the last two, and that fits very much, I think, in our interest, these are longer term, but professional development, training and education, can we together, because of the foreign affairs nature of our agencies, really look at how we're recruiting people, how do we develop them, how do we train them and advise them, and how do we do that in a more joint way? I know my last assignment before I failed at the first retirement and came back to work at the Commerce Department one more time was with the commander of Southern Command. And I learned a lot about jointness in the military sense of how one could really begin to be joint between the different military units. And I think there's an opportunity here to think about the intake and the career development, the training, even though your jobs might be in different agencies, but how does that actually inform and improve and enhance what is an excellent caliber now, but needs to be, I think, moved up the line. And training and education, very much how do we have customized immediate training on the emerging issues of the day so that our officer corps and our wonderful local employees, which are often the strength of our organizations, can be up to speed on the issues they're facing. Finally, then, the one theme that comes through this entire thing is why is the government involved in this when it's the marketplace? Clearly, we're talking about a public-private opportunity here. Companies make certain products and services. They're operating in a marketplace where governments are fixing rules and dealing with that. Clearly, the programs that we have in our government under our philosophy relate to that advocacy role where we're providing support to counter or at least make neutral the advocacy efforts of other countries, and also dealing with market imperfections where, frankly, companies are not able to ascertain exactly what they're going to need to make sure that market opportunity is developed. So I think if I left you with one final message after some of these top-line messages in the report, it was the important opportunity that awaits to see if there are new mechanisms that could be created in the public-private space that allow these kinds of systematic exchanges on the infrastructure of the program to take place as needed and required by the agencies that are executing the programs. I think that's been the right mix for you. You've got the report, and look forward, as you do, to the conversation to come. So, Ambassador Pickering, I turn it back to you. Thank you.